Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unleashing DePIN Podcast. My name is Tyler. I am your host, and I am excited for the next guest that we get to have on the pod. If you've been around the DePIN space for a little bit, I would be highly surprised if you haven't heard of this project. They are definitely one of the big players in the space, enabling a lot of incredible things to happen. So I'm excited to have Larry on the pod from IoTeX. He is one of the founding team members as well as head of business development at IoTeX. So Larry, welcome on. How you doing?
Doing great. Excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the Unleashing DePIN podcast. And excited to share all the updates we have going on at IoTeX and just chat broader DePIN sector. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. You guys have been both helping proliferate DePIN in a big way, and you've been around before this DePIN thing was DePIN. So before we start talking about IoTeX, for everybody who's tuning in, can you give a little context about who you are, your background, how you got into the Web3 space, and we can kick it off from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Larry, head of business development at IoTeX. My background is I went to school at MIT. I studied economics and finance, and after college, I went to the job where people go to when they don't know what they want to do outside of college, which is consulting. So I worked at a management consulting company for 5 years after college, which is kind of a long time in the management consulting space. At Oliver Wyman, which is the company I worked for, I was part of the digital tech and analytics practice, and we got to work with a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, basically to understand their tech stacks and decide whether they wanted to build or buy new systems. So we did a lot of the requirements definitions, the financial planning for these large scale tech projects. And we got to work with a bunch of like banks and clearing houses, public utilities, things like this. And it was kind of at Oliver Wyman doing these technology projects that I first was introduced to the tech sector. And there was one project in particular where we were working for a large clearinghouse. Clearinghouse is basically a bank-owned utility that clears and settles financial transactions. In this case, it was derivatives. And we were doing a buy versus build assessment for this clearinghouse. And one of the technologies they were looking at was blockchain. This was back in like 2016, 2017, when the technology wasn't really ready for prime time, and especially not in that grand of a scale of prime time. But it really piqued my interest as, wow, okay, you have this like neutral technology that is transparent and honestly is perfect for a clearinghouse. And that kind of started my rabbit hole thinking about, okay, what else could blockchain be applied to? And in 2017, I read the IoTeX white paper out of a recommendation from a friend. And that one also gave me a similar feeling of, wow, okay, this just makes sense that we can have blockchains as a technology to orchestrate devices, to add trust to the devices, and to monetize some of the value and the services coming from devices. So that was a really big aha moment. And I joined IoTeX only a few months after, in early 2018. And since then, been wearing a lot of hats. But we've grown from a small team of 8 or so when I joined to now 50 plus around the world. So it's been a long and fun 6 years that we've been building in this kind of blockchain plus smart devices, which now has a name of DePIN. But yeah, what a journey it's been. Fun to reminisce a little bit.
Oh, I'm sure. It's always fun getting a chance to kind of look back and see where you started and where you ended up. One of the things that fascinates me about IoTeX is that you guys were around, as you alluded to, prior to this sort of DePIN narrative being what it is, mainstream, lots of excitement, all that kind of good stuff. But there was certainly a lot of promise with tying a blockchain layer, bringing trust to these physical devices back in, as you mentioned, the 2017 timeframe. Where did IoTeX really start in terms of the problem it was solving and what it was building? And then maybe we can sort of juxtapose that into what you're doing today, because you have a lot of different products and solutions out there. And so let's talk about the origin, and then we can start unpacking some of the other things that you're working on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, back in 2018, it was still the era where people were, IoTeX as a technology platform, you think about us as a layer one. That's definitely where we started. So we built a layer one EVM compatible blockchain. And back then it was all the focus on how to write a sound consensus mechanism, how to increase the transactions per second, and how to just basically make the thing work, right? It was only until maybe like 2020, these layer ones really got to the point where they were really usable. And that really unlocked a lot of the new, like, simpler applications out there. Things like, DeFi is in no way simple, but compared to DePIN, which we'll talk a little bit about, I think DeFi is a lot simpler in implementation than what DePINs have to go through, especially because of the hardware side. But once the layer one solution, once the layer one was launched, the mainnet was launched like late 2019, we really shifted focus into thinking, okay, if we want to make DePIN a reality, what other pieces of technology, what other pieces of infrastructure do DePIN projects need in order to be successful? And that's when we started working on a lot of middleware tooling that's very device oriented, things like device identity, which has now evolved into a new product called IoID. We thought about, okay, devices are generating all this data all the time, but the raw data itself isn't really useful. So we have to compute proofs of real world activity, kind of find the needle in the haystack. And we needed an infrastructure to do that. So we built this product called WebStream, which is a off-chain computing platform where you can verify things that happen in the real world before you settle them to blockchains. We built wallets, we built explorers, we built bridges. So, building as a infrastructure provider, we're not really a DePIN ourselves. We're infrastructure for DePINs. But yeah, it's been a journey to figure out, work very closely with all these applications to figure out what exactly they need to be successful. And one thing we actually did is we produced our own smart devices that were blockchain compatible early on. So we built two devices. One is called UCAM, which is more of a consumer-facing device. It used blockchain identity as a way to own the data from a security camera, and that's selling on Amazon right now. And we built another product called Pebble Tracker, which is more of a data streaming, asset tracking device. And that's where we started to tinker with really advanced cryptography on the hardware side, where these devices are not only gathering data, but they're signing the data as it's gathered to provide a root of provenance, like an anchor of trust for all the downstream things and all the downstream transformations one would do to that data. So we really put ourselves in the shoes of a DePIN project, really to understand the hardware things that these DePIN projects go through. But the industry has evolved a lot. We went from custom built hardware to now a lot of third-party hardware being integrated into DePINs. So a lot has been figured out on the supply side, and that's driven by research from IoTeX, research from the industry. So it's really exciting to see all these devices being connected to the chain. But yeah, that's really been a big focus of IoTeX, is thinking ahead about what infrastructure DePINs need. We did it back in the day, and now we're doing it again with this kind of like renewed IoTeX 2.0 vision that we'll talk about, is thinking in the next 3 to 5 years, what do DePIN projects need to fully decentralize, to scale, and to reach mass adoption? So that's what IoTeX is all about.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I love a couple of things that you talked about. This, first of all, I think it's become really apparent more generally in the Web3 space that sort of the protocol itself isn't sufficient in a lot of respects. And so taking this, call it a hub and spoke approach, where you're building kind of the core layer one, but all that infrastructure that's needed for these different projects to actually launch and scale and be successful, is a very smart approach. And frankly, it's incredibly needed, especially seeing how many projects are leveraging IoTeX. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Ironically, one of the first exposures I had to your hardware products was through EnviroBlock, who we had on like almost a year ago at this point, and they were using the Pebble in their application, building on IoTeX. So it was really cool to see how all of these synergies kind of come together throughout different projects within the IoTeX ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. It's great to see the ecosystem growing now, for sure.
Yeah. What is the total number of projects that are building within the IoTeX ecosystem today? Do you have rough numbers on that for us?
It's definitely in the dozens. The thing with IoTeX is, we're a layer one, so we have EVM compatible smart contracts. So not only can we support DePIN projects, we can support any EVM, like a Solidity based smart contract. So IoTeX has always had like a bustling DeFi ecosystem. There's a lot of NFT projects that people launch on IoTeX. But DePIN is really the heart and soul of IoTeX, right? And right now, there's about 10 or so DePIN projects building, and a lot of new tokens, new assets going to be launched on the IoTeX network, which we're really excited about. And they cover a wide range of verticals, right? DePIN itself, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, is kind of like a horizontal concept that touches a lot of vertical industries, right? Definitely kickstarted by Helium and like the connectivity and the decentralized wireless sector, seeing a lot of stuff in the renewable energy sector, the GPUs, environmental data, transportation. So yeah, a lot of these things that we thought were just like idealistic kind of use cases, maybe even just 2 to 3 years ago, have now turned into real projects with real miners with real global reach. So DePIN's grown significantly for sure.
Yeah, no, the narrative has certainly taken off, and you guys have been a big enabler of that just through all of the infrastructure that you're building, which is a huge encouragement, I think, for builders in the space. You talked about the horizontal aspect of DePIN, and for us, for those that are long-term listeners of the podcast, we actually started off specifically in DY, realized somewhat quickly there that the opportunities using this model was much broader, as kind of this DePIN term colloquially became the narrative. Can you talk about some of the other ecosystem that are building within IoTeX? You mentioned environmental projects, you talked about renewable energy. Can you unpack just a couple specific use cases for folks to kind of wrap their mind around projects building on IoTeX and leveraging your infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the crux of DePIN is how do you aggregate the data and the services from different smart devices and create a product out of it that has demand from someone, right? So it's always important to think about the supply side and the demand side of things. So right now, I think DePIN, maybe there's another category, but I see it in two distinct sectors or subsectors, right? One is applications that focus on gathering useful data from devices, and the other is one that focuses on gathering useful services that a device may provide. And maybe a third one is gathering digital resources like storage or compute that traditionally would live on a cloud. And I think that distinction is really important because their go-to-market strategies and the way these projects launch, whichever category they're in, will be kind of unique, right? I think the data-focused projects are the ones that are most intuitive to most normies or people that are just getting into DePIN, right? It's the concept that, if I have a device that's producing useful data, like a weather station or a vehicle, I can aggregate that data from not just one source, but the populace, and create a data set that could have some type of value, right? A lot of the immediate value would be to sell that data set and share the proceeds with the users. But I think the ultimate journey for some of these data gathering projects is to become an application platform themselves, right? So if you have a great footprint of devices that are constantly grabbing data that's useful, then, for example, in the car space, we collaborate closely with Demo and some others. And Demo, I think, in the future wants to be their own platform, right? They don't necessarily want to build the Carfax on chain or the car insurance on chain. They want to work with other application builders who want to do those things, while they focus on producing a large enough footprint of devices to feed this massive data need of, one day applying AI, for example, and extracting value and selling those insights and, sharing it with their users, right? So the gathering of data, I think, is one really interesting focus. And I think it's made a lot of progress, right? And so have the services focused DePINs, right? These are ones that, if you think about a device, a smart device, you may think about like a sensor or a mobile phone, but devices are everywhere today. And as devices get smarter and more autonomous, very soon these devices are going to be producing services for humans, just the way like a human would go to another human for a service, right? And these service delivering DePINs is basically where you gather all these devices that produce the services, and there's someone on the other side, the demand side, that wants to tap into those services. And the people that provide the service through their device will earn some of the rewards that the person consuming the service will pay, right? There's one project on IoTeX called PowerPod. It's a good example of this, where they're trying to create a distributed electrical vehicle charging network. Here in the States, we have superchargers everywhere, but they're focused more on the Asian market, where these cities are dense, man. It's hard to find like a available parking spot, let alone one that will let you charge your vehicle. So these service delivering devices, like an EV charging station that someone may own in their own home, they aggregate all of that on a map and provide kind of like a public utility that other people can tap into. So that's kind of like the service delivering devices in the future. Elon's talking about like robo taxis and drone technologies. One day, I really think that people are going to be able to interact directly with a device that they want a service from, pay in cryptocurrency, receive that, and the owner of that device, without even interacting at a human-to-human level, just human-to-blockchain level, will be able to consume that service, right? And the last one that's really taken steam, a lot of hype around this kind of digital resource aggregation marketplace kind of concept, is kind of in the GPU space, in the storage space, right? People have always heard of Filecoin. They were kind of the OGs in this. People have computers everywhere that have excess storage, so let's bundle them all into one protocol, and we'll create a global storage system and reward the people that provide the digital resource in the form of storage, right? Now we're seeing it not just storage, like a database gigabyte level, but we're seeing it at a GPU level. And everyone knows how scarce GPUs are today with all the AI and the rendering that are going on. So the Akashas, the Jensens, the IONETs, the renders of the world are really introducing DePIN in a familiar way, kind of like Filecoin-esque, but adding the AI spin to it, which of course people love, right? So yeah, DePIN as a whole is a simple, elegant concept. Gather data and services from devices and create a product that other people demand, but it is chunked into some specific subsectors that I think are pretty meaningful.
Yeah, I love that the DePIN sort of philosophy, or the business model, if you want to call it that, has done such a good job of both creating a more equitable future for people that can participate. Yeah, everybody's talked about Facebook owns all your data, Google owns all your data. You don't have an opportunity to sort of monetize that and use it. And that's always been one of the promises of Web3. And DePIN is doing that at such a fast scale, and both the ability to sort of contribute, but also when you look at how quickly, I think every project that we've had on the podcast has scaled so incredibly fast, so much incredibly faster than their Web2 counterparts. Whether it's like the Hive mappers or, these projects at Valencia, they're collecting data so much more quickly using DePIN, and then everybody that's a stakeholder gets to benefit from the upside. It's just a beautiful model in that sense, and you love seeing all the different verticals on top of this DePIN space doing that and being successful, like you alluded to a little bit ago. It's just super cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioning like the data ownership piece like brings back some memories, because I think the thinking around like what customers want or everyday people want has shifted in this like blockchain and IoT or this DePIN sector, right? Because back in 2020, we launched that security camera called UCam, right? And this was a time when privacy on blockchains was the hot topic, right? Akin to, ZK today, or like account abstraction today. Everyone was talking about data ownership, data privacy. And what's really interesting is we built this device called UCam. It won like a CES Innovation Award at the time. It sold thousands and thousands of units on Amazon. But when we brought it to the Web3 audience, we realized, Web3 people don't really care too much about privacy today, unless usability is there and functionality is there, and monetization opportunities are there. Privacy is almost like an overlay, So that being said, we found a lot of people outside of crypto in the traditional like Web2 normie space. They're like, yeah, I want that, because maybe they care more about privacy than monetization. So it's interesting, like what you lead with, like what's taken steam, I think, is really this value capture and value distribution that DePIN has sparked. Is very intuitive for someone that, hey, I can buy a hotspot and contribute to a wireless network and earn proceeds from it as a stakeholder. I think one of the great examples I like to use is like Uber, right? Back in the day when Uber was bootstrapping, they gave tons and tons of incentives out to drivers and riders, just like crypto projects do today. It's just the case that they gave out cash incentives, whereas DePINs give out equity incentives, right? So imagine if you were an Uber driver and instead of getting $50 a week extra to drive, 10 plus hours a day, you were getting ownership and stock in Uber. You would definitely be a lot better off from like a value perspective than being a slave to the system. So that's, I think, a really powerful analogy that people can get around about like why join a DePIN. Well, you're really getting equity ownership in the things that you help construct and creating better products for the people out there. So
yeah, no, it's really exciting, and you're seeing it in so many different projects. But you're right. I love you talked about leading with privacy or leading with these products with different kind of value propositions. I cut my teeth in Web3 doing decentralized identity, trying to help people reclaim their privacy. That was sort of the thesis or the mission back then. And it's a hard value prop to sell individually, but having other benefits that kind of come alongside that as things that you can lead with and bringing people into the fold, especially like Web 2 normies. I mean, that is the holy grail of Web 3 adoption. And DePIN's just doing that so fast, so quickly. And, you guys enabling that is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even like outside of DePIN, right? Like right now, like zero knowledge proofs are like a very, very hot topic. But surprisingly, zero knowledge proof kind of implies privacy and data ownership, right? Like you can prove something to someone without exposing the raw data. That's like the one-liner definition most people use for zero knowledge. But surprisingly, people aren't using zero knowledge proofs for privacy. They're using it for scalability, right? Because the cryptography kind of sequences transactions in a very scalable way. So all the layer 2 rollups that are powered by ZK are not doing it for privacy. They're doing it for scalability and making the original platform better, right? So not to say that privacy isn't important. Like I'm a big privacy buff, but when you bring it to a new audience, it can't be the first thing that you lead with, right? It has to be, this is better than the alternative. It's fast, it's scalable, it provides ownership. Oh, and by the way, it's private, right? I think that's gonna, it's really, really important last step as an overlay to a very functioning product. But yeah, I think one day we'll definitely find, IoTeX is doing a lot of stuff in the ZK space for DePIN, not for the scalability side solely, but also for the privacy side. But as infrastructure builders, we know how long this kind of stuff takes. So yeah, we'll see it one day for sure.
That's amazing. And as a privacy buff myself, I'm equally as excited about the fact that that's part of your long-term roadmap, because it's an important component that is overlooked and unfortunately sort of gets second place to other benefits, which is understandable, but exciting to hear that that's going to be a core tenet of what you're building. There's been a lot of excitement around IoTeX 2.0. You talked about building for the next 3 to 5 years. Can you share a little bit with our audience about what IoTeX 2.0 is and sort of the longer term vision that the company is looking to build towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So IoTeX 1.0 was basically the vision that we defined in our original white paper back in 2017. And from that point, from 2017, we kind of try to construct a vision that was maybe 5 to 7 years out, right? It talked about a very scalable layer 1 blockchain. It talked about using advanced cryptography for the privacy side of things. It talked about a stack of middleware that helps connect devices to chains for the first time, right? And all those things I think we accomplished pretty well over the past 7 years. But now we have a really, really pragmatic, practical understanding of what DePIN is going to look like and what DePIN needs to succeed in the future, right? Right now, I don't think DePINs are very decentralized, right? And that's okay, because when DeFi first started, or when DAOs first started, DAOs are called decentralized autonomous organizations, but they were neither decentralized nor autonomous for a long time. They're just kind of like on-chain organizations, right? I think DePIN is in a very similar stage right now, where a lot of stuff is happening on the centralized computing side of things, and then it's settled onto a blockchain to reward users with tokens. But if we want DePIN to really replace some of these utilities that we tweet about all the time on Twitter and bash, then we really have to decentralize the full stack, right? So that's really what IoTeX 2.0 is about. It's evolving the IoTeX platform from simply a layer 1 blockchain into a full stack of modular infrastructure that really provides decentralized approaches to doing things that DePIN projects need to do. I mentioned earlier that DePINs are hard to build. It's not like something like DeFi where you can grab some code, open source code, fork it, and launch it with a new logo and a new meme, and then have liftoff, right? DePINs have the challenge of everything that DeFi apps have as well, but they also have to deal with an entire new category of technology, which is the hardware side, right? The hardware side is tricky. As a company that's built 2 hardware products from scratch, like this is not easy stuff to do. And not only on the physical hardware side, but like if you think about hardware and blockchains communicating with each other, there's a long journey that needs to happen. And basically in IoTeX 2.0, our vision, we've defined 9 essential layers for what a DePIN needs to be fully decentralized. The first layer is the hardware abstraction layer, which basically allows your device to speak the same language as some of these databases or some of these blockchains that will ultimately receive the data, right? So retrofitting hardware to be Web3 compatible is one important layer. Then you have the connectivity layer, right? Once you have a device, how do you bring data from that device to a computing environment? Once you're in that computing environment, you have the data availability layer, you have the sequencer layer, you have the storage layer, all the way to the off-chain computing layer, to the blockchain layer, and finally the identity layer. It's like a long road, right? I think talking about it from like a architecture standpoint, it may be a little bit confusing, but just to give you an example from like maybe, you're wearing a Whoop right now, I think. If you wanted to do like a healthcare use case where you're incentivizing people to improve their biomarkers or get more sleep at night, right? Very simple use case, but it takes a lot to make that happen, right? That Whoop needs to run, specific firmware or be like Web3 compatible with the hardware abstraction layer. The Whoop needs to communicate with another server. So whether it's Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, this connectivity layer, which some people like Streamer and Helium, et cetera, are trying to decentralize. Those are like the decentralized connectivity alternatives. You have the sequencer layers where you have all this streaming data from your Whoop, right? Your walking activity, your sleeping activity, your biomarkers, but you don't need all of that data for the specific use case that we talked about incentivizing better health. You really just need to create a time series of all the actions and cherry pick the insights that you want out of it, right? So it is very much like a needle in a haystack type of concept, because these devices produce so much data, but not all of it is needed for the incentive that you're trying to drive. So once we sequence the data, we make it available, we store some of it, that's the DA layer and the long-term storage layer. Then we have this set of data that we need to compute over, right? Maybe the incentive is your health score needs to be 5% better than it was last week, and you'll receive a token because of that, right? Well, the raw data can't tell you that. You have to compute these analytics and basically provide a proof of real-world activity, and that's what's submitted to a smart contract in order for you to get your rewards. And through that entire process, your device needs an on-chain identity, and you need an on-chain identity, and those identities need to be bound. So, we've just been talking about a very, very simple use case, but there's so many elements to it, right? So IoTex's goal is not just to provide centralized means to do what we talked about, but provide full verifiability of everything that happened from that kind of like step-by-step process. We want it to be verifiable. We want it to be running on decentralized protocols. And IoTeX is building some of those decentralized protocols, but IoTeX 2.0 is also a call to action to other infrastructure providers that maybe historically have serviced DeFi applications or other types of applications. We want them to bring in their technologies into the fold, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to data availability or storage, right? Filecoin's got that, Near DA and Celestia have got the DA side of things. We want to focus on partnering with these infrastructure companies, but also doing what we do best, which is more on the hardware identity side and the off-chain computing side of things. So there's a lot of other stuff that goes into IoTeX 2.0, really exciting tokenomics changes, or upgrades rather, and a lot of new components of the ecosystem. So we're launching a white paper very soon that was going to detail all of it. But yeah, in a nutshell, IoTeX 2.0 is really painting the picture of what DePIN was going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years, hopefully.
That's amazing. I'm really excited for the future of what you're building. I've got a lot of questions that I want to start asking about, but two things. First off, your comment about building, how many different layers of the stack need to go into this DePIN model, I think is something that builders or prospective builders can often, you somewhat take for granted how important that is until you get into the weeds or the deep end of the pool and you realize, man, there's kind of a lot to this in order to be successful, let alone building hardware, because that's not a trivial thing to pull off. But I wanted to sidebar for one quick second. You guys just did an event in Dubai, and I saw there was a photo that Rowland, your CEO, posted of what looked like a ring. I think that the intersection of DePIN and sort of health hardware is incredible. You mentioned the Whoop. I also wear an Oura ring. Do you know of any kind of health tracker DePIN projects that are coming out in the future that you can talk about? Because I'm kind of a geek for that, and I'm pretty excited about the prospects there.
Yeah, I've always been really interested in that category. It started with things like StepIn and Sweatcoin. There was a project on IoTeX called Health Blocks, and I think they're still trudging along, building, like a health-focused and incentivized healthy ecosystem. Yeah, I think one day we'll see some bustling healthcare projects, but it's yet to reach kind of escape velocity, I think, just because, we talked a little bit about the supply side and the demand side. I think like healthcare data is one where there's going to be so much supply of data out there. Anyone that has an iPhone tracks steps, right? That can be considered wellness data. Not really talking about medical data in this sense, but everyone has wellness data at their fingertips, right? Whether they use it themselves or want to contribute it to some larger purpose. But the demand side is tricky. And it goes back to these like data generating DePINs. Like these data generating DePINs is very much like a delayed gratification type of concept, because it takes so much data for data to be valuable. And that data is not just volume. It has to be continuous, meaning no lapses in it, like a continuous time series of years and years of healthcare data in order for people to run the analytics that they want on top of it, meaning extract value from this raw data, right? So we all know about, crypto projects giving away a bunch of tokens in the early days to incentivize early adopter fees, just like Uber did, right? It's like a good way to grow and bootstrap a project. But right, the incentives needed to extend that timeline to the point where, it's meaningful in the healthcare space and you start to run big data or machine learning on top of this healthcare data is a very long one, So in the meantime, you see people trying to gamify things the way StepIn did, or, launch reward point marketplaces like Sweatcoin did, right? But that's a tricky one. It's definitely one that also maybe has a little barrier to entry as far as like the privacy kind of thing, right? We just kind of bash privacy for a little bit as far as like users don't want it. But healthcare data and maybe like geo-positioning, like geolocation, are two categories that people actually do care about their privacy, right? Yeah. Whether or not, your car was in this parking lot or not, people maybe care about that, but they care a lot about their healthcare data, right?
Right.
But really, like, what I think will take healthcare DePIN and stuff to the next level is, healthcare data is kind of categorized into a lot of subcategories as well, right? We just talked a lot about wellness data, which is everywhere. There's, medical data, there's mental health data, there's sexual health data. There's all these different like subcategories of health data, right? And each one of those subcategories is, valuable in itself. But I think the real power is when you can start to understand, how does my sleep data impact my wellness data? How does my wellness data impact my medical data? How does my medical data impact my sexual health data? The interlinkages between these subcategories is something that also IoTeX 2.0 really wants to expand on, is how do you grab data from different DePIN networks and combine them to better understand the collective intelligence, not only of healthcare, but of the entire world, right? We talked a little bit about like, weather data informing transportation patterns, or how the weather is going to impact what happens in a smart city, how the weather is going to impact renewable energy production, right? Like these types of insights, which are kind of cross DePIN, requires a neutral infrastructure in order to do that, right? And IoTeX wants to be that neutral infrastructure. We want to enable DePINs to launch their own networks and capture their own value. But in the long run, I think intersecting these silos of value that live in specific DePINs is going to unlock a lot of new passive streams of revenue, in addition to the ones that you're getting directly from the DePIN that you're participating in, right? And the word AI is thrown around crypto, I think, a little too much these days, but that is really where AI comes into play, right? If you have the ability to draw cross-relational insights across industries, there's a huge opportunity where you use smart devices to produce the data and the services. You use blockchain to add trust to those data and services, and use AI to supercharge those data and services, extract value from them, automate them intelligently. And this is kind of like the holy trifecta of frontier technologies. Not going to say it's going to happen anytime soon in like a production environment, but a lot of really, really cool POCs happening that combine these three technologies to do exactly what we just talked about. So,
sure, it's such a forward-looking approach because you think about most of these DePIN projects, they're creating data for a very specific value set or particular customer, whether it's mapping or car data. But being able to serve as that neutral layer where you can aggregate these things is really interesting, because you can totally envision a world where you've got project A and project B and they have some synergies together, but you could totally create a new layer of value on the business side by combining that and ensuring the privacy is there. I love that that's how you're envisioning the future, because you're right, it does take a lot of data to be valuable. And so if you can serve as sort of that neutral infrastructure to be able to bring that together for the people on the demand side that want to buy that, it's a no-brainer. And that's really, I'm sure, the direction the world's going to be heading in.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's going to be heading in that direction. It already is on the centralized side of things, right? This concept of like real world intelligence, I think we're at the really, really interesting point in time regarding that. You see AI being applied to a lot of like specific verticals, like in the health sector, really bullish on AI, like solving really hard challenges like cancer and like, autoimmune diseases. But the potential of AI for data, I think, is untapped, right? And, in the AI sector, I think a lot of people are focusing on the GPU side of things, rightfully so, but there's more categories of AI that are out there, right? I think three distinct categories or three opportunities for crypto and AI. One is to corral the hardware necessary to run AI training, and that's exactly what these GPU projects like Akash and Render and IONET are doing. They're really focusing on aggregating GPU supply, and there's clear demand for it, right? So it's like a no-brainer type of use case. Another set of AI crypto kind of use cases I think is really interesting is where do the data inputs come from? And this is kind of what we're talking about, right? It's not really the crowdsourcing of the hardware itself, but it's crowdsourcing the data that's going to run on the hardware, right? That's going to train these LLMs and AI algorithms using the hardware that was crowdsourced, right? So the provenance of data, the trust of data, the diversity and the breadth and the time series of data is really important. And you can incentivize people to create these time series of data. And I guess that's what a lot of these data generating DePINs are doing, even if they don't know it already, right? And then the final application of AI in crypto is not about getting the hardware or the data to train the models, but to take the actual models that were created using the hardware and using the data and applying them onto DePIN data to better understand, exactly how does the weather impact transportation or renewable energy? How does the availability of hotspots impact, the functioning of like an urban planning type of environment? So the inferences category, where, a lot of people are used to inferences, even if they've used ChatGPT one time, you can start to prompt AI to say, hey, figure out how the world works in a way that maybe we don't see, right? So yeah, it's going to be really interesting, this intersection of DePIN and AI. People call it very buzzwordy, 2 buzzwords in one. But I really think it's more than just the hype. I think it's going to change a lot of things in the future.
Yeah, well, I certainly second your opinion and analysis on that. You talked about how with IoTeX 2.0, you've identified sort of these 9 layers, the different modules, whether that be the sequencer, the identity, GPU, all these different layers that have to kind of come together. In the IoTeX 2.0 world, where are you going to be focusing your efforts on building? You talked about your management consulting role of buy versus build. Where are you going to focus efforts on building those modules directly? And where are you going to be focused on partnering with other projects that are solving maybe a component of that 9-layer stack to be a provider within that IoTeX 2.0 ecosystem? Can you just unpack for us a little bit about how you're thinking of that moving forward?
100%. Yeah, it's a really great question. I think the buy versus build thing is definitely more of like a partner versus build, right?
Right.
But the things that we're focusing on really deeply are on the hardware identity side, and kind of like the embedded SDKs that are required to make make devices Web3 compatible. The identity side is something that's really interesting, right? Like, from day one, I think IoTeX has always believed that devices are going to be the largest users of blockchains in the future. And this is kind of like talking about a future autonomous world that is operated on blockchain, right? For that to happen, all these devices need some type of on-chain identity akin to a user's identity on the blockchain. You can think of them as like agents that are using and transacting with the blockchain, where you can have human-to-human interactions on a blockchain, you can have human-to-machine, and in the future you can have machine-to-machine, right? But the prerequisite to all of that is you have to have an identity, right? Whether it's a pseudonymous identity like a 0x address, or it is a unique identifier that the device manufacturer gave you, I need to be able to know that I'm dealing with this device and it has this identity, right? So IOID is a big part of that. We've been doing a lot of research on decentralized identity in the World Wide Web Consortium. We actually started an IEEE standard on DID for devices, and figuring out how to use like the credentials mechanism to really create an ecosystem where we can enforce authorizations about what devices are able to interact with which protocols, which devices receive rewards, and how they're split amongst maybe fractional owners. So there's a lot of things that are underneath this kind of IOID concept, but put simply, like, devices need identities, and the IoTeX L1 we're trying to position as like the global registry for devices using this IOID identity protocol. I would say the other big layer that we're focusing on is the off-chain computing layer, which is WebStream. And before that, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen, right? The data needs to be transmitted from the device. It needs to be sequenced. It needs to be stored, and needs to be made available by a data availability layer. And those are things that we're going to be partnering with companies like Near, DA, Filecoin, Espresso. And these are all companies that are doing the sequencing, the storing, and the availability-ing of data. And once we have that, we've built a really, really sophisticated off-chain computing environment called WebStream. And it's using zero-knowledge proofs, ZK scaling, in order to take raw data and generate a proof of real-world activity, right? So going back to some of the examples, if you have a device like a vehicle that's just constantly streaming data about how many miles you've driven, the speed you've driven, whether your seatbelt's on, how fast you turn the steering wheel, not all of that data is needed if you're just trying to say, hey, if you drive 100 miles or more, you get a token. Or if you drive 200 miles or more under a certain speed limit, you get a token, right? All of the other excess data maybe can be put into long-term storage, but it's not something you need to really compute over, right? And these computations about like what people do in the real world and settling that to a chain is really sounds simple, but there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's a reason why all this off-chain computing needs to happen off-chain. Is a smart contract can't do this in a cost-efficient or efficient manner for that matter, right? So doing all this off-chain is really the focus of WebStream, using zero knowledge proofs in order to also add the privacy angle if you wanted to, right? So, and of course, on the blockchain layer, IoTeX is always improving our L1 technology. I don't think more needs to be said about the security of the chain. It's never gone down in the past 6 years, but we're constantly improving the scalability and the decentralization of the L1 chain as well. But yeah, we're just really excited, I think, to work with these new infrastructure companies. And before, when you try to collaborate with other large companies like a Filecoin, it's always like, what are you guys going to do and what are we going to do? Now that we've defined these very clear modules and very clear layers, it kind of helps projects understand, okay, that's where I plug in, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned this a bit ago, but having started my Web3 career in the decentralized identity space, trying to shape standards at the W3C and whatnot, there's such an opportunity on the hardware side. I think more so than humans. You think about how many IoT devices there are, and as these become smart and interface with the chain, being able to leverage, pseudonymous identifiers, decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials is a really amazing way to take what has not got a lot of traction and success, but is a very tangible way of addressing some of the problems that will be faced as you get, millions and potentially billions of hardware devices online. It's really cool to hear you talk about that. For the WebStream product that you've built, can you talk about a couple projects that are currently using it, kind of that onboarding experience possibly, and maybe share a few projects that are coming into the ecosystem using WebStream in the future that you're able to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. WebStream has been under development for over a year now, probably longer from a theoretical and thinking level, but from an engineering level, we've been really grinding for the past year to put out WebStream, and excited to say that the testnet, WebStream Sprout, is launching probably around the end of May. And before now, we've been kind of live on DevNet. There's been a lot of interesting POCs that have been constructed, working with different types of hardware. We really dug deep into the Raspberry Pi, Arduino, and ESP32, kind of like the dev board environments, which, more and more devices are adopting these kind of chipsets and kind of operating systems. So trying to onboard or make all these kind of devices compatible with WebStream, right? We've done some really interesting POCs also with traditional organizations. There's one called Western Engineering where we've done a use case. They basically have a peer-to-peer energy sharing network. Historically, they're a battery and a solar panel company, but they wanted to use WebStream to kind of use the blockchain as a ledger. So they're porting all their data into WebStream, and we're basically hashing the periodic updates about who has produced what energy, who have they traded that with, and no token in their ecosystem. They're more trying to use it as kind of a ledger use case. But, in the future, we have this accelerator called DePIN Surf that we're just wrapping up the first cohort on. And I think 5 new projects are going to be launching on IoTeX and using WebStream. So I mentioned PowerPod. They're doing the distributed EV charging use case. EnviroBlock, as you mentioned, they're using the Pebble Tracker in order to gather environmental data from different smart homes. We have Inferix, which is a team out in Asia that's doing the GPU kind of AI training using GPUs. We have Network 3, which I think is doing something in the VPN space, kind of like Orchid from the past, but more focused on, I think, mobile devices. And they're a company that's coming from the Web 2 space into Web 3, so they have tons and tons of existing users that they're trying to implant a more Web 3 distributed business model into. We have Wayru, which is decentralized wireless. They're coming, focusing more on the South American market. And yeah, there's tons more that are, applying into this DePIN Surf cohort too, which is open. Anyone's listening that wants to join the accelerator. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting projects being launched. There's a kind of a VC frenzy right now. Everyone's trying to grab the money and go back to heads down building. But I think there's a lot of really cool bootstrapped projects that, everyone thinks about DePIN as solving the world's biggest problems, right? How do you get people connected to the internet? How do you, get people power? This is very true. And there's really large teams working on the global level scale of things. But I think another overlooked part of DePIN is you can have a community focused DePIN. it doesn't have to apply to everyone in the world, right? If you're part of the world produces energy in a specific way, or maybe your world doesn't even have 5G connectivity. So what are 5G hotspots going to do for you? You're still on kind of like the 3G spectrum or whatever. Thinking about like DePIN from more of like a community and a smaller scale, we're trying to support those projects as well. And those are the ones that, you know, don't have the large teams, the huge VC funding. They just want like a plug and play tech stack and a really supportive foundation from a go-to-market perspective and a community perspective. So where we think DePIN's for everyone, not just from a user perspective, but also from a builder perspective. So yeah, want to play with all the builders, big and small, out there.
That's so great. And it's exciting to hear that you've got quite a few different types of DePIN projects that are currently building and leveraging WebStream. Really shows the versatility. And I agree with you, having these smaller projects, I could be wrong on this, but I have a suspicion that a lot of these kind of smaller community-driven projects will actually do the most in terms of onboarding, because their success trajectory or their success viability is a little bit less binary. They can build, you know, a few 100,000 or 1 million users, and you can get a lot of these different projects that can tap into the DePIN benefits, but you don't need, you know, one to say, hey, we're going to get 7 billion people or whatever on our network. So it's really, you know, the future's bright for these different projects that are able to tap into what you're enabling with WebStream and IoTeX more generally.
Yeah, I think for like the locally produced DePINs, like one important challenge that solves, and like other DePINs kind of take a more brute force approach to this, is like the balance of supply and demand, right? If you're trying to launch like a global scale DePIN, the first step you have to do is you got to produce a shit ton of supply, right?
Yeah.
And not all of that supply is useful, you know,
Right.
Meaning there's no demand for that supply. So there's a lot of leakage when you try to go too big, too fast. But if you're more constrained and more, you know, sector focused or like region focused, there's going to be way less leakage of supply and demand, because you know why you're creating the supply is because there's already predictable demand, versus the brute force approach of like, let's build a huge ton of supply and then figure out the demand side later on, right? And I think that's really why DePIN's taken off. Is like, it's easier than ever to build supply compared to the days when Helium and IoTeX produced the first like DePIN devices, right? Like these were custom devices. There was a long queue of it. Every like 500 were manufactured a year. And now we have real device manufacturers saying, you know, at will, if you want one, we can ship you one in 2 weeks, right? So the supply side is definitely, with the incorporation of third-party hardware and non-custom hardware, is getting a lot easier to produce. And again, I think it's easier to build the supply side because who's going to say no to, hey, buy this $50 device and it's going to mint you $200 worth of tokens, right? But is it sustainable in the long term that that device is actually going to fill some type of demand? That's the challenge, right? So I think these regional focused DePINs, less leakage, more purposeful supply building, and then scale it from there, right? Take it to other kind of cities after that. So
yeah, I'm bullish on those teams that are sort of bootstrapping. They've got a really clear audience and they're able to deliver a value prop for both the supply and demand side in a tactical and kind of quick, scalable way. It's great.
Exactly.
On a little bit of a lighter hearted subject, we've talked about, you know, the future and how exciting it's going to be. I wanted to take a chance to chat about something that's a bit less serious, which is meme coins. There's a few meme coins on the IoTeX platform, or sort of in the ecosystem. For people that are excited about the meme coin frenzy, is it something you can talk a bit about and share some projects that are kind of in the fold?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think just to capture like the moment right now of memes, right? I think, yeah, memes have mimetic value. And I don't know what the market cap of WIF is right now, but I think it's like 8 billion. Is there an extra zero or a less zero? Like, it's something, I know it's like top 35 in terms of market cap right now, right?
Right.
And people can roll their eyes at that, but it means something, right? Where the alignment on a concept has global reach, right? There was a really interesting thread that some CT Anon was posting, right, about like his strategy about meme coins. It's really like all or nothing in his view, right? Either you buy and hold a meme coin to the end, or you let it fail, right? And the ones that he chooses to hold until the end, he has a criteria, and there's like a very simple criteria that I think is really useful to think about. Is like, does this have global reach, right? One of my favorite memes in past history was this Costco hot dog meme where they were trying to get
that, by the way.
You did? I mean,
yeah.
What was it trading at right now? I know it's supposed to go to $1.50, right?
I know. I sold. It like went up and then kind of came back down. I think I sold it like whatever my cost basis was, but it didn't quite get to $1.50. I was bullish until I was not.
Yeah, and I think there was no issue with Costco hot dog. I hope it still goes to $1.50, right? But the issue in my mind is like Costco hot dogs are not global. They're very specifically American, right? Like if $1.50 does not mean 150 euros or 150 RMB. It's not like a universal enough concept for it to really escape velocity, right? Dog with hat, very universal. Cats, universal. Like Vitalik butter chicken, not very universal. I don't know if that one's going to make it, right? So there's like so many, and talking about the universality, if that's a word, of memes, I also think DePIN is also very universal, right? It's not like a concept where no one has smart devices or no one has public utilities that are untrusted and corrupt in a way. Everyone has this problem, and it's like a global shared problem that we're trying to address with a more diplomatic approach to it, right? So the fact that someone can contribute their data, whether they're this country or that country or this country, immediately universal, right? From a healthcare perspective, right? Everyone has wearables in most countries, at least the ones that are connected to the internet today. Extremely universal concept. Having shitty signal on your cell phone because the carrier doesn't reach deep enough, and maybe DePIN can provide a more density of coverage in your area. Universal concept, right? So in a way, I would love to see DePIN even go further into the meme category, right? Like, I don't know if there's a DePIN/meme intersection right now, but it does capture the same like ethos of meme culture in a way. It's like something that everyone can agree on and everyone can kind of get behind from a conceptual level. Whether they justify the billions of market cap, I think let's just consider it a great top of funnel retail user acquisition strategy for now.
Oh, but without question,
not much.
Yeah, not as much of a meme coin. We had DY Cats on the pod a few episodes ago, and they're leveraging kind of a similar philosophy, which is a fun PFP that actually on the other end of it gets people involved with deploying hardware and getting upside. And I think the future intersection of the fun novelty side to Web3 will be, as you mentioned, a great top of funnel for getting deep in adoption. And however that manifests itself, it's somewhat TBD, but there's definitely a lot of potential for getting exposure and interest. I mean, think of all the meme coins out the world. Dogecoins is kind of a household name at this point. There's been a few others. So I agree that it has some legs if someone does the implementation the right way to get exposure, get users onboarded. It's certainly a fun wedge, if you will, for that onboarding.
Yeah, it's really important to have community too in crypto, right? Like, I think how Helium did the naming of their hotspots, just something fun, like awkward aardvark, right? Like they assign you like an adjective and a noun for your hotspot. It allowed people to like have some fun with it, right? And IoTeX, I think our community is also like has some plans, not to launch a meme coin. Maybe there will be ones that sprout from this, but like they wanted like a mascot, and I think the ones that the community has like corralled around is the goat. And there's a story behind everything, right? But the goat is kind of like the greatest of all tech. Not saying that IoTeX is, but DePIN is, right? So if you're building in DePIN, then you're goated. So I love that concept. Maybe some people will launch a goat meme coin, or sleepy goat, or drunk goat, or like whatever. But just let the people have their fun with it. But from a financial advice standpoint, do your own research.
Sure.
But have your fun too,
Yeah, this is a public call out. Someone should definitely launch that. They need to make goat for like a DePIN meme. I will be a buyer if that's what it is. Hopefully someone will make that a reality. Well, gosh, we've talked about so many things, the future with IoTeX 2.0, WebStream coming out of testnet here in the immediate future. Are there other sort of future roadmap details and items that you're able to share with us for people that are interested and excited about what's ahead?
Yeah, as IoTeX just grows as a network, like there's a lot of growing pains that we've gone through, and we're just trying to define what's next from like a 3 to 5 years perspective. Those growing pains I don't talk about as like negatives. Like it's taught us a lot about the staying power of crypto and just being more disciplined and pragmatic about like what do people really want, right? It's not really like a spray and pray approach anymore. We're trying to be very specific about what we do next. And what we do next is we turn IoTeX not just into a layer 1, but like a galaxy of DePINs, right? Being less tribal, inviting more people to integrate their technologies in a modular fashion into what we do, and upgrading the tokenomics accordingly, right? As we have new stakeholders and new contributors to the network, the tokenomics will be upgraded in order to address that. Yeah, we're just excited, man. For so long, like we were the project that was just yelling from a loudspeaker about blockchain and IoT and machine-fi and, all these different terms for DePIN. Now that DePIN is stuck and we have like a global community around DePIN, and we see people like Gary Tan and like, Vitalik talking about DePIN, it's like night and day. So I really feel like the entire industry has like a wind at our backs right now, but we can't just stand still. We got to run with the wind. And a lot of that is just about enabling others to do their best work, right? So, I sometimes get jealous of DePIN D-app builders because it sounds really cool what they do, but we're kind of like one layer underneath. Like our customers are not users necessarily. Our customers are developers, right? So how do we make the developers' lives easier so that they can make users' lives easier? It's kind of like one degree of separation, maybe like an arm's length away. Not to say that, anyone that uses like an IoTeX powered D-app is part of our user base, but really we're trying to figure out how to enable the next generation of DePIN developers. So yeah, nothing too specific to share. Everyone pay attention to IoTeX 2.0 is going to come with a lot of new product launches, new white paper, new tokenomics, and it's more than just fancy marketing branding thing. It's really an evolution of the network that's going to be coming. So just very excited for that.
Yeah, that's great. For people that want to get involved, if they're a project, they're a builder, what's the best way to get in touch with the team, start having those conversations about becoming part of the ecosystem? What does that look like for those that are starting the build process or are already building and there's like, oh, I got this huge void I need solved. They can come to IoTeX. What does that look like?
If you want to join the community, we just we were on Telegram for so long, but we finally maybe like 3 months ago launched our Discord. But whether you're on Telegram or Discord, find one of our mods there. That we have a great ambassador program, great ways to contribute, no matter if you're a developer or just like a moderator or just a spectator, right? Reach out to one of the mods and they can help you get on board. If you're a developer, we always have grant programs available, and we just launched this accelerator project with Future Money Group, Foresight Ventures, and a few other VCs to really bring DePINs from like it's kind of like the last mile, right? These projects are going to raise money with or without us, but with us, they can, reach a larger group of investors. They can have more, future planning for their Series A. So it's a really, really great accelerator program. It's called DePIN Surf. And if you're interested in that, Dean from DePIN Surf, you can definitely reach out to him and apply to cohort 2. I think applications are closing in the next few weeks or so. And if you're just, a larger project or working on some DePIN infrastructure and want to plug into this kind of modular IoTeX 2.0 tech stack, reach out to the IoTeX BD team, bd@iotex.io or hello@iotex.io. Yeah, we're pretty responsive on all platforms, and we'll get you to the right person you need to talk to. Yeah, excited just to see the ecosystem grow, and make new friends all across the world. So DePIN is definitely a global movement here.
It is an absolute global movement, and we love seeing everybody helping drive that into its maturity phase. It's really great. Well, Larry, this has been an awesome conversation. I've been excited to have you on the pod so I can hear firsthand exactly what you're doing, what's sort of ahead. The future looks very bright. It's been an incredible run so far, and I know all of us are very excited about what's going to come next. So we wanted to thank you. We will absolutely be sure to link all of those links below for the accelerator, for getting in touch with the team, Discord, Telegram, you name it. But on that note, we'll wrap it up here, everybody. Larry, wanted to thank you again. Be sure to go follow IoTeX on Twitter, join their Discord and Telegram so you can get in the conversation. And if you're a builder, be sure to reach out to the team. And we'll see everybody on the next one. Thanks so much, Larry.
Yeah, thanks for having me.